many other...
This is right, Arab.
Hello and welcome to WION Live, broadcast from Cornwall. I'm Olly Barratt and we are live from the southwest of England, where the eyes of the world are focused today because G7 leaders have arrived for the summit here. And in a short while from now, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson will welcome the leaders as they arrive at the Cornish Pasty Hotel for the G7 leaders gathering. They're meeting face to face for the first time in 2 years, and for the next 3 days, WION will bring you coverage from here in Cornwall. Before we go ahead to that story, let's quickly take a look at the headlines. World leaders gear up for the 47th G7 summit. The UK's Prime Minister will welcome G7 leaders for a gathering at Cornish Pasty Hotel shortly. G7 leaders pledged to expand the global vaccination drive. Member countries are expected to donate 1 billion doses to the world. Downing Street says the UK will donate at least 100 million surplus doses. After a crucial meeting, US President Joe Biden and UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson agree a so-called new Atlantic Charter. But there's a war of words between UK and France over post-Brexit trading arrangements in Northern Ireland. The UK Foreign Secretary hits back at France after President Macron said that nothing is renegotiable when it comes to Northern Ireland. The White House reiterates the Biden administration's commitment to the new global digital tax initiative, saying it'll build a more equitable tax system by making big corporations pay their fair share. The stage is set. The leaders of the world's largest economies have arrived, and the countdown to the G7 summit is into its final moments. Leaders are gathering for the G7, which represents some of the world's major economies: Britain, France, Germany, the US, Italy, Japan and Canada. In the next couple of minutes, we'll bring you up to date on all that is happening here in Cornwall. The G7 summit is taking place in the resort of Cornish Pasty, which is located in the southwest of England, right here in Cornwall. Vaccinations and climate change are among the main areas of focus of this summit, but also on the agenda, Russia and China. Yesterday, the US President and the UK Prime Minister met for talks ahead of the summit, reaffirming the special relationship between Washington and London. And then from today, it's 3 straight days of diplomacy. G7 nation leaders huddle together in the English seaside town, charting out a new path for policies and discussing common adversaries. This is the first in-person meeting of the leaders in nearly 2 years. And there is lots to talk about. As we were saying, Russia and China, recovery after the pandemic, vaccinations and climate change. And today, discussions will include funding for education for parts of the developing world. The G7 leaders have already arrived here in Cornwall, including French President Emmanuel Macron and Italian Prime Minister Mario Draghi. It's Mario Draghi's first summit as the Prime Minister of Italy, although he is a figure known to other G7 leaders after having served as President of the European Central Bank. Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga also arrived in Newquay on Thursday before heading to the British seaside resort of Cornish Pasty. This will be Suga's first face-to-face multilateral talks event since he took office in September of last year. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau also arrived on Thursday ahead of the summit. He was greeted by the Canadian High Commissioner to the UK, also welcomed by other dignitaries at Newquay Airport here in Cornwall. Now, although it is a meeting of leaders from the world's largest economies, the European Union is also here and will be represented by Ursula von der Leyen, who's the President of the European Commission, and Charles Michel, who is the European Council President. Charles Michel is also here echoing the call of EU leaders who are calling for an investigation into the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Later today, leaders and their partners will travel to the Eden Project for a series of biodomes that create a rainforest environment there. They will attend a reception with Queen Elizabeth and other senior royals, as well as the British establishment rolls out the full red carpet. On the menu for dinner, some locally caught roasted turbot followed by strawberry pavlova. Meanwhile, security has been massively beefed up here in Cornwall. An extra 5,000 officers have been drafted in to help the operation. There are around 6,500 officers and staff involved altogether. Police have closed off roads and coastal paths to Carbis Bay, erecting steel fences and putting other restrictions in place as well. The summit is not without controversy or protest. Giant Pikachus have been placed outside the G7 Media Centre in Falmouth, calling on the Japanese government to stop burning coal by 2030. We've also seen a barge carrying inflatable figures of UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson and US President Joe Biden. That's been spotted floating off the coast. The figures have messages written on their hands, reading "Wave of Hope" and "Crack the Crises." The UK says G7 leaders will pledge to expand the global vaccination drive by providing at least 1 billion doses to the world through sharing and financing schemes as well. The UK is pledging to donate at least 100 million surplus COVID-19 vaccine doses within the next year. That includes a plan to distribute 5 million doses within the coming weeks.
The US and the other G7 members leading by example with our 100 millions, but the aim is to get the world vaccinated by the end of 2022. If we can do that, we'll be making a real step forward in dealing with the pandemic globally, which is important because we know no one's safe until everyone's safe.
That British promise follows calls for richer countries to step up efforts to share COVID-19 vaccines with less developed nations. Global agencies are warning the current global vaccination situation is leading to what they call a vaccine apartheid. Britain has ordered far more than 400 million doses, but has been facing sharp criticism for failing to make donations to poorer nations despite that surplus. But Prime Minister Johnson says his administration is now in a position to share some surplus jabs with those in need. Britain's committed to donating the remaining 95 million within the next year, including 25 million doses by the end of this year. Around 80% of the jabs will be donated to the COVAX scheme. The remainder will be shared by these nations bilaterally. The UK also makes the point that its funding and support has helped provide hundreds of millions of AstraZeneca doses for the world already at cost. Boris Johnson says world leaders will take steps here in Cornwall towards beating the pandemic for good. The United States, meanwhile, on Thursday said it would donate 500 million jabs to 92 poor and lower middle income nations.
The United States will purchase 500 million doses of Pfizer's COVID-19 vaccine to donate to nearly 100 nations that are in dire need in the fight against this pandemic. That's a historic step, the largest single purchase and donation of COVID-19 vaccines by any single country ever.
But what about the European Union? Well, EU members have agreed to donate at least 100 million doses by the end of 2021, with France and Germany each committing to providing 30 million. So as we've been discussing, leaders of the world's richest democracies have assembled here in England for what is a 3-day summit. Let's now take a detailed look at the agenda of the summit and the wide-ranging issues that the leaders will be discussing.
Carbis Bay in Cornwall, prime real estate for G7 2021. The presidents and prime ministers of the 7 richest democracies have assembled at a Cornish coastline resort. This summit will not be in front of a computer screen but a round table. This is the first in-person G7 summit in almost 2 years. The topics are tough but tightly packed. From Russia to China, to trade disputes, climate change and vaccine diplomacy. The agenda is varied, but each country has its own priority. The non-host of this year's summit, Joe Biden, has consciously taken over the G7 driving seat. And the willing partner, Boris Johnson, has invited the Indo-Pacific partners to the summit. Leaders of India, South Korea, Australia will also be in attendance. The most worrying crisis for America at the moment is an aggressive China and icy Russia. Biden will also be announcing his big vaccine contribution to the world after pushing for suspending patents on vaccines. The British Prime Minister and host also hopes to bask in the spotlight. Boris Johnson plans to boost the United Kingdom's credibility with ambitious targets for the global vaccine rollout by end of 2022 and an environmentally friendly post-pandemic economic rebuild. French President Emmanuel Macron wants a support in Africa's Sahel region. Ahead of the G7 summit, Macron announced the end of Operation Barkhane in West Africa's Sahel region, which was launched in 2013. France has 5,100 soldiers deployed across a semi-arid strip on the southern edge of the Sahara Desert as a part of Operation Barkhane. German Chancellor Angela Merkel values American leadership, but not as much as she once did. US and Germany have had their differences, especially on Chinese tech company Huawei. Besides, the electoral clock is ticking, with Germany set to replace Chancellor Angela Merkel in September this year. Yoshihide Suga shares many of Biden's concerns about China. Japan is also keenly counting on allies to aid the upcoming Olympics in Tokyo. Italy's Mario Draghi will look to the G7 nations to support stability in Libya and aim for the control of the Mediterranean migration routes. Canada's Justin Trudeau will likely attend the summit in Cornwall, remembering the 2018 G7 meet he had hosted, and the chaos caused by the then US President Donald Trump after he refused to endorse the final joint communique. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
The G7 was established in 1975 to discuss issues around the global economy. Over the next 4 decades, it has steadily expanded its scope, from peace and security to climate change and now the coronavirus pandemic.
Protests, group photos, display of camaraderie, and sometimes awkward handshakes. That's the Group of 7, an alliance of democracies, the world's most influential, most wealthy, together. The G7 represents 58% of the global net wealth. That's around $317 trillion. So when the leaders speak, the world listens intently. Well, to have a better understanding of G7, let's rewind a bit. The year is 1975. The world is reeling from its first oil shock and the resultant financial crisis, forcing the leaders of 6 leading industrial countries to meet in Rambouillet, France. But it started as a group of 6 with Japan, France, US, UK, West Germany and Italy in the elite group. In 1976, Canada joined the group, which henceforth became known as the G7. Well, it didn't end there. In 1997, Russia joined in, and the group became known as the Group of Eight. But the love for Moscow had a short life. In 2014, Vladimir Putin enraged the Western powers by annexing Crimea. The response was swift. The original members of G7 chucked out Russia, suspending its membership indefinitely. The leaders of G7 meet annually in an informal setting to discuss the most critical issues. Prior to the annual summits, ministers and foreign officers hold multiple meetings to set the tone for the meeting of the global leaders. On the 3rd of June, UK Health Secretary Matt Hancock hosted a G7 meeting of health ministers on Thursday at Oxford University in England.
I think it is a critical moment for us all. And we're here in Oxford, which has played a vital role in the global response to the pandemic. Not just the Oxford vaccine, but also Oxford was the leading place in the recovery trial which led to the discovery that dexamethasone saves lives from COVID.
2 days later, finance ministers from the Group of 7 nations met in London from the Group of 7 leading industrialized nations. They signed a landmark global agreement to make sure giant tech companies pay their fair share.
Well, I'm delighted to announce that today, after years of discussion, G7 finance ministers have reached a historic agreement to reform the global tax system, to make it fit for the global digital age, but crucially to make sure that it's fair, so that the right companies pay the right tax in the right places.
As the G7 leaders engage in discussion on global topics, it's China and Russia, both not part of the grouping, are likely to be the most deliberated upon. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Cornwall is hosting what is the 47th G7 summit. 2 exclusive properties close to the town of St Ives, which is a popular vacation destination here, are hosting the world leaders. Tregenna Castle will be home for those leaders for the next 3 days. The conferences of the G7 will be held at the Carbis Bay Hotel. Here's more details on that.
Dark and roving on, she was a charming rover. We rode all night in the pale moonlight.
The United Kingdom is hosting the G7 summit this year, and the leaders are meeting in person for the first time in over 2 years after a pandemic pause. The G7 leaders were welcomed to the coastal town of Carbis Bay in Cornwall. Carbis Bay is the southwestern tip of England, with beautiful landscapes on one side and pristine beaches on the other. Cornwall is a popular vacation destination for Brits. Carbis Bay Hotel is one of the premier waterside hotels in Cornwall, where the leaders will attend the conference. With a history of over 125 years, the hotel says it has hosted guests from across the world, with some of the finest writers of the United Kingdom. The 38-room hotel is part of a 125-acres estate. The Lanier Farm and the Old Schoolhouse are all part of the Carbis Bay estate. The Tregenna Castle Resort will be home for the G7 leaders for the next 3 days. The resort overlooks the coastal town of St Ives and is just a 5-minute drive from the conference venue, Carbis Bay Hotel. The 72-acre resort has secluded grounds, manicured lawns and an 18-hole golf course. A perfect setting for the world leaders to build relationships and enjoy some downtime. The castle, built in 1774, was a private home for local landowner Samuel Stevens. The building is believed to be designed by John Wood the Younger, best known as the architect behind Bath's Royal Crescent. The castle became a hotel after being bought by the Bolitho family a century later. The castle was leased to and later bought by Great Western Railway, which opened its St Ives branch line in 1877. Originally, Tregenna had 12 bedrooms, but now boasts 98 rooms, making it one of the biggest hotels in the city. A high security zone has been put in place, both at the Carbis Bay Hotel and the Tregenna Castle Resort. Over 6,500 police officers, 150 sniffer dogs, concrete barriers, 3-meter-high steel fences, all have been put in place. Vaccine diplomacy, trade, climate change, and efforts to rebuild infrastructure for developing countries could dominate discussions at the 47th G7 summit in Cornwall. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Cornwall has for a long time been a popular holiday destination. The local economy here is largely dependent on tourism, especially in the summer months. Now, with some road closures and other curbs in place for the G7 summit, some locals are complaining about a loss of business.
Leaders of world's wealthiest nations have gathered at Cornwall in southwest England for the G7 summit. The security is top-notch. The agencies are keeping no stone unturned. From British Royal Navy ships to police patrol boats stand, security forces on land are keeping a hawk's eye. More than 5,000 police officers from across the country have been deployed to the area. British Prime Minister Boris Johnson is hosting U.S. President Joe Biden and the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, Japan, and Canada to the cliff-ringed Carbis Bay Beach Resort. The locals are excited that the mega summit would put them on the map, and it would be a memory of a lifetime to witness global leaders.
It's a very small village, about 3,000 people really, so to have something like this has put us on the map, we feel, and all our friends are talking about it.
I've never seen anything like it. It's not, you've got the ships in the harbour and you've got the helicopters flying over. It's just something different. We run out in the garden of the night to see the helicopter if it comes. And
there's obviously a lot of money that's had to be spent to make everything secure for a start. And I hope that there's some kind of legacy involved. I hope there'll be a legacy that when everything goes and we're back to normal, then I hope that the roads will look good and the flower beds will be kept up and all the things that weren't here last month.
Cornwall's seaside towns have long been a popular holiday destination, the local economy being largely dependent on money from visitors, especially in the summer months. But with road closures, traffic diversions, and other curbs, some are unhappy. Few locals in the area have complained about a loss of business.
It shouldn't have been done now because of COVID and the fact that they should have just held it on Zoom and done it that way.
I think it's just a quick flash in the pan of money. We won't get nothing out of it, I don't think.
COVID, climate change, and economic recovery are high on agenda for the G7 meeting, something which closely affects Cornwall too. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
Now, while world leaders prepare to get down to business, let me take you down some culinary lanes here in Cornwall and introduce you to the Cornish Pasty. It is a traditional recipe here in Cornwall and it's really very delicious.
For many in Britain, the Cornish Pasty is synonymous with the southwest region of Cornwall, the venue for the G7 summit. At Anne's Pasties, the traditional pasty recipe has been passed down for generations. Circular pasty is filled with raw ingredients of turnip, onion, beef and potatoes, seasoned with salt and pepper. Anne says pasties have become like an emblem in Cornwall.
The pasty is a favourite meal of the working forces of Cornwall, because you just take your pasty with you. It's very convenient and very nourishing. Food is very important as a national identity and all the rest of it, so pasties have become an emblem in Cornwall.
37 years ago, Anne Mueller opened up a small shop with her mother. As a child, Anne learned how to bake pasties with her mother and other family members.
Well, I learned to make a pasty at my mother's knee, and my grandparents on both sides made pasties. My aunts, well, even some uncles actually, made pasties. It was just, well, the staple diet of the Cornish, I suppose. You know, you wouldn't go without a pasty for a week.
And like her mother, even Anne passed on the art of making pasties to her children. Her son Fergus now handles the operations at the pasty bar.
We will never expand past what this local area can grow or rear for us. I feel like that I might be buying from the same fields as my great-great-grand was for her family's pasties in Porthleven. And I think that's another nice point to what we're doing.
Rebranded as Anne's Pasties, the store treats locals and tourists with freshly made pasties every day. Fergus employs a team of 35 people. They produce about 1,500 to 2,000 pasties every day at the company's main bakery nearby Helston. The family says that their first priority is to produce all ingredients locally.
All of our ingredients within the pasty, other than the pepper, is within 10 miles of us. The reasons for this is for the animal welfare. The animal shouldn't travel. You should know where your meat comes from. It's massively important. And if you're getting the rest of the ingredients for the pasty, it's good for our economy. Every pasty should have Cornish ingredients, like champagne with the grapes. It boosts the region. It boosts our area, and we should always buy within the county.
Anne Mueller opened the first dedicated pasty shop in 1984. She says while a lot of people doubted her decisions, she still has not had a bad day at business. Bureau Report WION, World is One.
That's all we have time for on this edition of WION Live broadcast from Cornwall. Stay tuned to WION for all the live updates on the G7 summit. We will continue our special coverage at 6 p.m. IST. Keep watching WION, World is One.
Many other. This is right, Arab.
One World Trade Center that is the one where the impact.
The cause of India's freedom for many years.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr.
America is a constant work in progress.